moving into the second question, aside from the safety of our patients, I think the most important thing that we get out of a clinical trial is the data that we gather from it, because that data is which will hopefully go to the FDA and lead to an approval and patients being able to use our new medications. The data we gather has to be clean. It has to be high quality, of course. Real world data is not gathered in the same manner that we gather data in a clinical trial. It's not always coming from the same sources, but obviously we want that data to be clean and quality as well, especially if we're going to be making important decisions based on it. So this was a question that I came up with, and we had a couple of attendees today, Katan and others, who focused on this quality question as well. How can pharma companies ensure that the real-world evidence and data we are gathering are meeting that cleanliness and quality standards that we demand of our data? Christoph, why don't we go ahead and start with you and give us some insights from your company?
I absolutely agree. The biggest challenge is what we call regulatory grade data. I guess you could say that regulatory grade data is an artificial term, because you could define it as, regulatory grade data is any data that a regulatory authority is willing to accept. But I think we all agree that there is a certain degree of data quality that you have to ensure for the inference making that you base this data on. And on the other hand, I guess we still want to retain the real life setting. Pharmaceutical companies should keep in mind that it is critical to assess the fitness of real world data in terms of reliability. Very important. How do I accrue the data, and how to assure that the data is correct? As well as the data, of course, has to be relevant. While FDA does not endorse one type of real-world data over another, when you collect real-world data, you should make sure that it's based on the research question that you intend to answer. For the purpose of evaluating drug safety, for example, the FDA has pretty much already outlined its perspective. How we can use real-world data that is available in electronic health records. Safety studies can be conducted, and it's clearly laid out in the guidance to the industry. I think there's some other approaches we should keep in mind. Evidence, for example, is based on ICD-9 or ICD-10 coding. We obviously have to make sure that that coding is done correctly, because that is actually going to have a huge impact if it's not. Laboratory data is another aspect that provides certain challenges, because it might be inconsistent, it might be incomplete, and that, of course, will then not enable us to evaluate changes over time. Another frequently used type of data right now, for example, is registry information. A lot of pharmaceutical companies, as well as scientific organizations, are utilizing registries and use registries to generate real-world data. We have to make sure when we do that we gather enough follow-up information to really answer the question that we want to answer, as well as ensure the validity and the quality of the data. Minimizing missing or incomplete data is key here, because it has a huge impact of the quality of the output. Moreover, in respect to data relevancy, I think it's important to examine whether a full range of outcomes that could be used for study endpoints, like exacerbation of a disease, hospitalization for a specific condition, or other kind of disease outcomes, are consistently captured in that data. It might not necessarily always be the case. In this, regarding connecting data elements residing in different parts of the healthcare system, especially in the United States, will be critical. Otherwise, we might end up with a completely incomplete picture of the patient journey. And kind of ruins of utilizing real-world data and generating real-world evidence.
And just one quick follow-up. I know if we're conducting a clinical trial and working with patients, we can have missing or incomplete data that you mentioned from somebody just deciding to drop out of the trial or somebody not taking their medication as prescribed or something along those lines. When we're talking real-world data and real-world evidence, what does that missing or incomplete data look like, or where is that coming from? I'm not sure I'm clear on that.
Well, so first of all, in a randomized controlled clinical trial, you try to minimize that incomplete data as much as you can, because if you have too much incomplete data, if you have too much patient dropout, at some point you have a problem with the validity of the trial. And to some extent, I think you have to make the same assumption of real-world evidence. Obviously, you cannot be as strict with real-world evidence as you are in randomized controlled clinical trials. But in general, you want to make sure that your data is as complete as possible. What makes it more complicated with real-world evidence is that technically your patients will not drop out. You will just not have the data to do further follow-up. And there's no way to know that in advance, how you do that. And that's why it's so important that when you collect real-world evidence, you set up your real-world evidence collection in a way that you try to minimize that as much as possible. So the one example I gave in the US healthcare system, and I'm happy to have more conversations about that, is, if a patient goes from one healthcare system to the next, if a patient goes from a hospital to home-based care, there is a danger of not being able to continue to collect this evidence. Then, for example, equivalent to a dropout in a randomized controlled clinical trials. But trying to combine different data sets, I can try to minimize that. But I need to plan for that in advance to make sure that that doesn't happen or minimize that impact.
And Greg, as I mentioned earlier, I think your last year for you was just a year full of gathering of this evidence. Anything that you learned about the quality, cleanliness of that data that you can share with us?
Well, I will say that Securus, that's one of our #1 issues. You really need good quality data. Here are 4 practical ways that we try to address it. We create a scientific advisory committee that's external, so that they're looking at our data, not just all of us internally looking at it. #2, we try to get external authors to participate. Their academic careers will depend upon how good the publications are. Second thing is, we believe in publishing the data that we create. Not that, oh, we didn't get what we wanted, so we bury it. We take it to publication and we put it into a peer-reviewed journal so that other people are reading it and deciding what the quality of the data is. And then finally, we encourage all of our publications, but all of our analysis to be presented at scientific or medical meetings. Those are 4 ways that are helpful, in that if we were just creating data for the sake of data to try to show that our vaccine is marvelous, if it doesn't go through those 4 hoops, it's very difficult to prove that its fitness, that fitness of purpose is correct. So quality is important, and those are 4 practical ways in which we at Securus deal with that.
Yeah, those are good recommendations. And you mentioned a scientific advisory committee. For anybody who's maybe thinking, hey, we should do something like that as well, can you tell me a little bit about who you were going after, what kind of people you felt would be the best fit for that committee?
Yeah, so what we do, and because we live in the influenza space, we're a vaccine company that focuses on influenza, we look for academic scientists, physicians that are well published in the field. And so that we look for people that have done real world evidence or are well known because of their own research. So we're picking out, so we'll go to PubMed and we'll Google influenza and see who the top 10 authors are, and then we'll start approaching them. We know who our key opinion leaders are or who the leaders are in influenza, and we'll go to them. Some of them will say, no, I'm sorry, I have an academic career and I don't want to interface with pharma. That's okay. And then we go to others that say that they believe that it's an important collaboration. And so we can get them on our scientific board, and then we'll go out to other academic people and say, would you be willing to partner with us on this research? Those are some of the ways that that we try to make sure that our data is as good as it gets.
Great. And Ranga, I'd like to get your thoughts in here too. Anything you can share about the data quality, cleanliness from your perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy here. See, Berg basically is in the basic biology, translating it into the phase 1 and a phase 2 setting, where it's more of a clinical proof of concept setup. We don't get into the phase 3 randomized trial setting yet. And one of the things at Berg that we do is a very comprehensive molecular profiling of patient biology based to generate a pharmacodynamic profile of the drug when you compare it with a appropriate control during the progress of our clinical trial. And one of the ways we are able to validate that biology is to get through retrospective biological biospecimens that might be available from other clinical trial repositories. And one of the prerequisites that we go after is to see how well the biological samples are clinically annotated. And when we talk about clinical annotations, it boils down to everything that was done for the from a patient history to all the data that's in the electronic medical records, because the molecular profiles is what is the information that is within the electronic records and everything else in the real world data setup is what is going to enable the molecular profiles and for our analysis to gain insights on how to implement what we get out of the biological profiles. And so oftentimes what happens for us is we find that there are gaps. And so it is a challenge, but I think as more and more people are getting into the space where we are finding that the data within the real world setup is getting better as we progress, because people are understanding the importance of the need for cleanliness of the data and the data capture. So it's a challenge, but it's something that is being recognized within the industry, and steps are being taken to actually address these things.